Next guest on the Quantum Shift podcast is someone who has reframed one of the most universal human experiences, chaos, and turned it into a powerful compass for leadership, growth, as well as self mastery. Colleen Goufert is the creator of the Build Without Chaos framework, a leadership and growth model that teaches something completely counterintuitive, that chaos isn't the enemy. It's the invitation. This conversation is for anyone who's ever felt overwhelmed, overextended, or stuck inside a system that seems allergic to clarity. It's also for anyone ready to create without burning out, lead without breaking down, and build with a kind of steadiness that scales. Colleen is here to help us move from chaos to clarity to creation. Please welcome Colleen to the Quantum Shift podcast. Colleen, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very happy to have you. So I figured we'd kick off with a quote that I spotted on your website. It says, chaos isn't the enemy, it's the invitation. What inspired that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess for me, a little bit about myself, I spent years in high growth tech environments. So, the baseline was always urgency, always scale as fast as possible. And what I learned there is while I was delivering results, it was at the expense of burnout and clarity. And so, really, I created this podcast called Build Without Chaos because it came from the realization that growth doesn't have to be chaotic. And that's really what I believe in. So, this podcast led me to explore the idea publicly with people and leaders to understand how they navigate chaos and how they've chosen a different path.
Uh,
So,
do you feel-
going back to your question, in high growth environments, you're constantly disconnected. You're running fast. You're saying yes to everything because you're operating from a place of fear things won't get done, fear that you might get fired if you say no. And it felt like control in the moment, but it was fear and it's
yeah,
rooted in chaos.
yeah,
So this was really the norm in how leaders were operating, right? Like it wasn't just me, but I started to think in a chaotic environment, is chaos really the problem or is there more to it? Right. And that's when I started to understand and think through chaos really isn't the enemy. It's the invitation to understand what's really going on behind the scenes.
that's interesting. Probably a more empowering way to look at it instead of saying, "Oh, we're just going to deal with fire drills all day, no matter what's
Yeah.
happening." So obviously, you're moving toward discovering what's causing the chaos. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what have you
Yeah.
discovered?
Well, so when I look back in that environment, I felt like we were constantly operating in motion with no results. And it was just so frustrating. You're doing everything right. You're following what you know, what you've been taught, but it's still chaos. Even deadlines, campaign launches were getting pushed. It manifests that way, right? I kept trying to push. I felt like if I just pushed harder, I'd outpace this chaos, right? Like instead of really trying to understand it, where's it coming from? And so that was the real wake up call for me. Where is this chaos actually coming from? And I remember there was this really specific meeting and it was very tense amongst leaders and we needed to get to a decision. And in this meeting, I really softened my stance and I did it to keep the calm in the room. And that was a breaking point for me because that's not who I am and that's not how I operate as a leader. And I wasn't being true to myself in that moment. And I had to have a real think about how I wanted to be showing up in these environments.
Yeah,
And what I realized is if I'm in a position where I need to shrink my clarity to stay comfortable, that's survival mode. That's not leadership. What I had to do in that moment was stop matching the dysfunction in my environment. And I had to design my own clarity. And I had to stop waiting for my environment to change. in order for me to be happy. Because I think that's what I kept doing. I kept thinking if I keep pushing forward, if I just overlook this chaos, then everything will work out. But nothing was working out, and it was just causing constant frustration.
Do you feel like as an executive that we kind of get caught up in the this is just the way it's supposed to be
I do.
because it's such high growth?
I do.
Then how do we get around that? Because I feel like when you're in it, because I have absolutely been in those situations, especially, and it can be very off putting and upsetting when you push your true feelings on a situation just to keep the peace. It's kind of like mom and
Yeah.
dad are fighting. We don't want mom and dad to fight again so that we could just have dinner in
Yeah.
peace. How do you how do you help executives get past that to kind of pull back? It seems like you kind of it's probably like an almost like an outer body where you were like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
don't do that. You know, you're pulling up and looking down at the situation. You're like, that's cuckoo. That's not
Yeah. Well, I so for me in that moment, like I had to really think through how I want to show up as a leader. And I feel like as soon as you make that determination, the first test always comes right after that, right? And in this particular situation, we had a reorg going on, we had a system migration happening. It was chaos at its utmost. I was in a fork in the road because I could adapt the corporate spin that was going on, but instead I leaned into being transparent. And I opened up communication and flow on my teams. So I was transparent with my team on what was I know to be true and what wasn't. And I sat in that discomfort with them and I was really being humanistic. And what I saw in that moment was I started to create an environment based on trust.
right.
And everyone began to exhale. So
Mm.
I guess to answer your question, you can create a calm environment yourself. You don't necessarily need to be waiting for leadership to align on what it is you need.
Mm.
And so that moment, it turned into a rhythm on my team, became the standard of how we move forward as a culture.
And when you did this, I'm very curious about this is so fascinating to me because I definitely experienced this. How did you communicate that to other leaders within the org? Or was it
Yeah.
just like, I'm going to give this a shot, see how my team reacts? And so it seems like you're nodding, you're saying, yes, I communicated that. But did you each define what that looks like?
So I did. And what I realized is other leaders can operate in chaos. It doesn't mean that I need to. So I just operate from clarity. And what happened is I operated from clarity and the outcome was growth. My team was happier. My team started to produce results. They weren't so frustrated. So the other leaders who were operating in chaos looked at that and looked at the results and adapted it.
Mm,
So it's about what's actually working, it's the outcome of it. That's
mm.
how I really see this.
Do you see executives feeling a cognitive dissonance between what you put forth as calm and clarity versus urgency? Because I have this conversation so often. As a matter of fact, this past weekend I was talking to my mother over coffee about this, and I said there's something about the way I approach work, and I'm sure everybody could relate to this, where it's kind of like work needs to hurt. Right? There's
Yeah.
like this thing that's been ingrained in us, like, if you're not grinding, you know, that's sort of that grinding culture, and calm and clarity seemingly goes completely against that, where it's like, well, you're not getting anything done if you're calm and you have clarity. You gotta be, you know, chaos and urgency. How do you reconcile that when that probably more times than not is an executive's default setting just by virtue of
Yeah.
our global culture, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So in that example, we started moving in rhythm with each other and we stopped reacting to the culture. And the clarity replaced the chaos, not because it went away,
Right.
but because we were able to navigate it.
So
And
can
that's
you
the real
unpack that?
takeaway.
Like, what exactly did you do with that team? Because now I'm very curious. I want to learn.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, like I said, in that specific example, we had a system migration and a reorg. People were freaking out, right? Like nobody really could understand their own role clarity, what this meant. And on top of it, we were trying to make sure lead flow was moving into the sales team because we had revenue goals to hit. And so instead of skating over it and pretending this will all be over soon, right? I sat in that leadership role with my team. I opened up office hours. I sat down and listened to what it was they were going through. And I started to understand that this chaos is something underneath that we need to resolve. And this is kind of, I can kind of dive into the framework that
Yeah, please.
I
I'm really
talk to.
curious. Yeah.
Because so the framework that I show up with, I start by decoding the chaos, right? So that's what I was doing in these meetings. So the chaos shows up, but there's always something underneath it. And you need to understand where energy and bandwidth are being wasted, right? And it usually manifests like unclear ownership, misaligned goals, reactive decision making. Often when I step into advisory work as a go to market strategist, I will constantly see that there's frustration and finger pointing between the sales and marketing team, for example.
Yeah.
That's a common it's a
I'm
common
giggling because I'm a career sales and marketing guy, and yeah, it's always there, no matter what.
it's always something, right? And so that's causing chaos amongst the teams, and no one really can understand why. So you need to decode what's actually causing that chaos. And in that example, I mean, we could talk for days about what it looks like, but maybe it's lead routing issues. Maybe it's the CRM solution not pushing forth leads correctly, or analytics isn't giving proper attribution to lead flow, right? And so all that starts finger pointing. So once you can understand what's actually causing the chaos, then you can start and move into designing the calm. And that's when you identify the structures. So instead of skating over, oh, it's just chaotic right now, it's taking accountability to understand what's happening underneath the surface and then taking the accountability to design the calm. So you identify structures, you put that into play. You have phases that you work through. You have a timeline. And you're building transparency and a rhythm that reestablishes trust amongst the team because they know that there's a deadline to the chaos ending.
Yeah.
That's honestly, Chris, that's where I
Yeah, it's
see a
important.
lot of people falter.
Yeah,
A lot of
it is
people will
important.
close their laptop at the end of the day and just be like, you know what? It's just a chaotic environment right now. It'll all clear up on its own. But when does that ever happen?
Never.
Yeah.
It's funny because I'm thinking about, like, 5 separate instances in my career, and I'm thinking of one now where it's almost like this critical switch gets flipped where, yeah, they sort of acquiesce to chaos, but then also switch into something that could be even more dangerous, which I'm sure you see a lot in your work if you're working with organizations that where you're kind of sort of clarifying the chaos, is apathy. Where if the culture knows that things just don't get fixed around here and that's just the way it is, that they might, the chaos in that department might just be, smoke and mirrors. They're kind of like, it's never going to change. This is just, I've wrestled with the marketing qualified leads and how do you define what an MQL is that goes over to the sales team. And then the marketing team will say, wait a minute, these BDRs don't even know what we're selling. They're talking to these prospects correctly and they're not converting them. And then the account manager gets on a call with the lead and they give a demo and the demo isn't received well because the prospect is like, what is this? I have no
Yeah.
idea. So I think when those gears are really crunched up like that, apathy can be a really dangerous thing. So in your environment, how large was that organization and how large are the organizations that you typically map this framework to?
Yeah, it really doesn't matter the size because even in larger organizations, you can go into departments that are chaotic, right? And those are smaller within the organization. So I think it's moving department by department and understanding where the chaos is really rooted from. Like you mentioned, you said, one team may be just that's the way it is. They're just chaotic, right? So that's really a part of decoding the chaos. Why is it that team? And like I mentioned, there's tons of people who will just say, that's how it is.
Mm,
When this is just the environment here, it's high growth tech. And that I really want to move to a place where building without chaos is not a luxury, it's the norm.
right. Right. Do you think that's more of like a cultural thing, like moving away from that sort of hustle culture and grinding, especially within the tech industry? I mean, we've both been doing
Yeah.
similar gigs for our careers where it's kind of like, how do you determine whether distinguish between productive chaos and destructive noise?
Yeah. I mean, so I don't think calm leadership means you don't hustle. I think it means you hustle with precision and alignment. And that's the difference. And I think when you move from designing the calm, then you can move into building without chaos. And what that actually means is creating systems and organizations that scale calmly with results. And the results start to show up fast, right? It looks like faster decisions being made, more autonomy, fewer fire drills. It's really about applying clarity and accountability.
Hmm. What are, if somebody's listening to this right now and they're like, they can kind of feel the chaos on the horizon, things are kind of going sideways. What are some signs that you see with your clients of teams sort of slipping into that dangerous reaction mode instead of what talk about it like an awareness mode?
Yeah. I think first of all, start small. You don't have to solve the chaos from day one. That sounds overwhelming. But you can start looking at things that are misaligned in your environment and how you feel about it. If there's one thing I can reflect on, it's that I wish earlier I would have started reacting more to chaotic environments and understanding how I was feeling in the moment instead of overlooking it. And so don't ignore those misalignments because they're showing up for a reason. In the example I mentioned about being in that meeting and softening my stance, that's happened before, but in that particular meeting is when I became very clear that that's not how I want to lead and I
Right.
need to choose a different path. And I think it's also important to understand that you don't have to wait for leadership to become aligned or for a leader to tell you, let's just do it this way or that way, right? You can start small yourself.
I
And
was gonna
in
say that's
that,
a good one. Yeah. What do you tell people that are sort of reporting to higher ups that are creating the chaotic environment? How do they fix it for themselves?
what I say is if you're waiting for other people to change, you're going to be waiting a very, very long time
Yeah.
because
It
that's
ain't.
not how it works. Right. I wish you could just say, oh my gosh, if that one person just didn't work here anymore.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
Works.
Right. Like you've got to make that change from within.
Yeah.
And
So
so
what are
really
some of the
this is
things that you maybe
good.
personally or with your clients do in order to stay for those executives to stay grounded when things start to unravel? It's just the clarity of their mission. Is there other tactical things that you work with them for?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I've realized with calm leadership is it's a muscle that you're building. It's not something that you just like flip the switch and that's it. So, reading the cues in your environment and understanding how you're reacting towards that, that's what's important because here's the thing, the chaos is always going to be there. It's really just how you mitigate it yourself inside the workplace and outside the workplace. And so what I do personally is every day I practice. If I think through choosing clarity over noise. And really that's the inner work, Chris. It's how you're constantly showing up in environments and in situations and choosing clarity over chaos.
And what does that look like for you? Is that asking because for myself it's like morning ritual of workout, meditate. I was lucky enough that some of these jobs I had a commute that was not crazy but long enough where I could be on Metro North and close my eyes and think things through. And not everybody has that where they're kind of just waking up and bursting through the door of the office. How would you recommend that people could kind of add a little bit of that calm so that they can gain clarity amid that noise in their workday?
I think you gotta be real with yourself, right? So, you really have to be someone who is self-aware,
Hmm.
and don't overlook the feelings that you might have in an environment, and don't blame that's just how it is, we're in high growth tech, it's hustle culture, that doesn't need to be the norm. So, really understanding that it starts with you, and, you know, it may not be for everybody, but if you're someone who's really struggling, being self-aware and realizing that you need to make a change is really powerful.
Mm. Yeah, and get yourself out of the situation. Is
Yeah,
there does that seem to be part of your work where you're just coming into these organizations as a bit of a sounding board where, because I know there's a lot of cultures that reward that maybe not chaos, but that sort of kinetic, constant motion.
right.
Like, how do you reconcile that for maybe a young executive that just is like, oh, that's the way it is. I don't have the power to change that.
Well, if you're believing that, you're probably not the right client for me. I'm just gonna be honest. So if you're thinking this is just how it is and I'm cool running my company like this, then that's okay. If you wanna run your company on a chaotic landscape. But I'd also challenge that person, because I love to know how the results are. I love to know how burnout is in that culture. I love to understand turnover. Are you burning through employees? Are they doing in Silicon Valley what's hot right now, the 996, right? Working from 9 to 9, 6 days a week? Because a hustle culture, I have rarely seen a hustle culture like that be successful.
How do leaders that are aware of this and are like picking up what you're putting down and they're like, yeah, absolutely, Colleen, like I get it. How do you, because this just clicked for me when you said burnout. How do, and I think a lot of people have difficulty identifying burnout, right?
Yeah, I agree.
What are some of the signs to look for when you're just like, I'm burning out, my team is burning out? Like, what are those markers?
Well, you and I could probably talk about this forever, but I think burnout really comes from knowing that it affects your personal life too. A positive work environment should be effortless. There shouldn't really be a difference between how you're working during the day and your personal environment. It should be seamless if you think about it. It shouldn't be that you need your free time to recover from
Hmm.
your work time. And I'm speaking from my own life experience on this. Avoiding plans with friends because you just wanna watch bad reality TV.
Yeah, junk food for your brain.
Looking for an outlet that will just help you decompress.
Hmm.
Those are some key signs of burnout, I think. I don't know, what do you think? You mentioned that you've been through it. Was there anything you
I think I have a hard time defining it in myself until it's crept up and manifest in
I
a
agree.
different way. And because of that, I've implemented certain habits that are non-negotiables for me. I think Andrew Huberman, the neuroscientist, said that your brain likes non-negotiables. And what he means by that is if you commit to, for me, it's CrossFit every morning, same time, no matter what. And I have friends that are in that CrossFit community that hold me accountable. Hey, Chris, where were you? And if my brain isn't allowed the opportunity to convince myself otherwise, because you'll come up with every excuse that you could possibly come up with
Yeah,
as you get fatigued, whatever, as long as it's a non negotiable, I'm going to do it. And those types of anchors have allowed for me to not to get completely burnt out.
yeah,
It's more difficult, I've found, for me to define it in my team, unless you, like you said, where you're kind of sitting down with them and discussing that and having transparency. And I always found that consistent check-ins that are non-negotiables again. So it's like weekly team meetings and one-on-ones. One-on-ones are the opportunity for me to ask them, how are you?
mhm.
And it's only could be 10 minutes, could be 5 minutes. That's the one-on-one. With my sales teams, yeah, we'd have to get into sales numbers sometimes with the one-on-one, but that was more of like the safe environment. The weekly meeting was the where we could go through numbers and deal with it that way. But those one-on-ones allowed for me to keep my finger on the pulse of the team members pretty well. People are
Yeah.
still, I think executives, young and old, are concerned about sort of logging a complaint. I'm tired, or anything along those lines, because they're concerned about getting fired. They don't want,
Yeah.
if they're really in that sort of chaotic, high pressure environment, and it's high, it's tech and it's moving fast and it's growing, and you were employee number 10, and all of a sudden there's, 55 employees a year later, and you're in that environment, you don't want to be the one that says, I'm tired. You don't want to, you don't want to do that. But I will say the good things that I'm seeing in our culture is that meditation is mainstream now. I have to meditate or I lose my marbles.
Yep.
And I think when somebody talks about a meditation app, or even apps like BetterHelp, and getting even remote therapy, that is a lot more, people are a lot more comfortable discussing these types of topics in the work environment than they've ever been. And I think that that's beautiful, frankly. I think that's a good thing. And I think my generation is Gen Xers sometimes misinterpret a Gen Z perspective of, if they're in an interview process and they say, I'd really prefer to come in at 10 and leave at 7. A Gen Xer might be like, get out of here.
Yeah.
Who are you to say that? Um, there's a young man, Will, who does that for Gen Z, where he talks about, that issue. And when he was talking to me about it, he's like, do you think that that's weird that the Gen Xer got upset? And I was like, no, not at all. He's like, really? He's like, even if I told you that I'd be more efficient coming in at 10 and leaving later, I was like, dude, way that we were brought into this system was you will show up when we tell you, and you will leave when we tell you. So the second you say that that's how you optimize your work, that cognitive dissonance and miscommunication becomes an issue. You're all kind of saying the same thing, but sometimes we need facilitators like yourself to say, hey, let's figure out how to optimize this work environment. Let's figure out if Bobby likes to come in at noon and stay in the office until 9 and he gets his work done, cool, let him do it. But that's got to be from the top. You have to be okay with that. I've always been okay with that because I'm a sales manager and sales guy. It's like the sales team performs, cool. You do whatever you want. You're like, you want to
Right. Right. Right.
you want to spend a week at a conference and sit in the lobby and meet with 30 people and close 30 deals. I don't need to see you in the office. You don't need to
Right.
be, you don't need
Yeah.
to be there. So
Yeah. I think one thing that I see under decoding the chaos, if we talk about the framework, is there's a lot of misalignment with role clarity and
yes.
what people are supposed to do in environments, work environments, and what they think that they should be doing. And that really causes a lot of chaos. And when I started to dive into that tension there, I realized it's boundaries inside the work environment and really creating that and helping people create that. Because a lot of people would just be diving into other people's work, doing 2 jobs at once.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, that's burnout right there.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because I've absolutely seen it happen. I think what I've determined my teams, actually, my Uncle Bill is a mentor of mine, brilliant guy. He's a Vistage chair. He's got like 300 CEOs that he advises down in Austin, Texas. And he talks about that type of stuff being an algorithm, that it's the culture setting, the job description, the rails with which each team member can run on. It's all an algorithm, and that it's almost like it's exactly everything that you're saying. But sometimes executives don't have the confidence probably to take a minute, step
Yeah.
back, create that algorithm and infrastructure and say, hey, it all starts with onboarding. We're not onboarding these people properly. Or it maybe even starts with the job description that's been posted. The job has changed and evolved since then, but we didn't train that person to do the job that they're doing now. So I would go back and say, all right, let's look at onboarding. What were they trained to do within the organization? Let's look at their KPIs. Are we managing their KPIs? Are they working with HR and saying, or their manager and saying, I need to see an upward mobility and a pathway for myself. I think that's also hugely impactful, especially for Gen Z. If they don't see that they're working towards something, you get a
Yeah.
lot of people just sort of checking out because, like, great, I'm going to be at this role forever. This is awful. This is torture. I'm doing everybody's job. And if you can gain that clarity and say, hey, if you do this job really well, you'll get this job and then this job, that becomes powerful. And if you implement quarterly reviews and one-on-one reviews, 360 reviews, that type of thing, it is difficult though, like especially in tech when it's lean and mean and moving fast. There's probably not an HR team. It's like it's probably like the COO, who's the roommate of the founder, is HR, and if they're not putting together a playbook, and then they hire a guy like me as chief revenue officer, and hey, I'm a career sales guy. I've never done HR stuff. I'm lucky because I've run my own agency before, so I've done every job under the sun. But not a lot of executives have done that, and they don't really know to go to the source of the infection and to solve those things. It reminds me of I'm like looking at my bookshelf because it reminds me of a book called Upstream, and I forget the author's name, but in the book Upstream, I'm going to see it. There it is. Dan Heath. Recommendation for anybody that's listening, Dan Heath, Upstream. And he talks about exactly what you're doing because being able to implement calm from the chaos is about discovering the source of the infection upstream so that you can then solve problems further downstream. And once you start making sure that recruitment is aligned, the job description is aligned, onboarding is aligned, KPIs are clear, meetings are set in advance once the person has been onboarded, and you have these lines in the sand, and there's an upward mobility path so that they feel comfortable with it. And there's a 360 review. Many times it can solve a million other problems, right? Because it's kind of like when you meet the kids that there's no discipline at home, those kids. You meet the kids that have structure and discipline at home. It's like we all crave structure.
I agree.
We don't realize it. I think like the gift that you're doing that you're bringing to your client base is you're bringing, structure to the team. Bringing discipline to the team. And when that happens in their structure, people love it. It's like,
I love
I
it.
was told to do the thing. I'm going to do that thing really well. And then when you do that thing really well for, a boss like you, it's like, here, look, I did this thing really well. Then everybody's happy. Yay. On to the next thing we
Right.
all do really well.
Yeah, and I think also being aware of when people achieve things, achieve goals.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's overlooked, right? It's like, "Okay, good, you did it, great. What's your next goal?" And that's not helpful either in these environments.
Yeah. People need a slap on the back. The Navy SEALs talk about the power of the quick win, where even like the smallest thing should be acknowledged. And
Yeah,
even though you don't think it's not like the big, oh, we closed this massive deal. It's kind of like, hey, everybody on the team was updating the CRM properly. Thanks, gang. And then you just go on to the next thing. And it's like those little slaps on the back go a long way. I know it did for me when I had some crappy bosses back in the day. So, so, what are some of the markers that you think that people can, if they go into an organization and perhaps chaos is not something that they would thrive, an environment that they would thrive in. I guess, I don't know. Do you recommend that they just get out of that environment as quickly as possible and feel comfortable being like, hey, that's not for me? Or do you feel like people that need to be able to take a step back and think a little bit more? Are there ways that they can kind of still navigate things in a chaotic environment? And the reason why I'm asking that is because one environment that I was in, I do know that my team members were better than I was at doing this, where I would always stay in my desk, but they were very good at kind of grabbing their laptop and like going into the lobby and sitting on a couch and like doing their busy work that way. And you could see them decompress almost, being able to just extract themselves from that environment.
I think you gotta have your non-negotiables,
Yeah.
and you gotta understand first, try yourself to take accountability and understand where that misalignment is and make the change that you wanna see in the organization. But, I say this, and I have been in organizations and needed the paycheck, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't have the luxury of just being able to walk away.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
It's scary when that happens, really
yeah.
scary, because 'cause you're like, "Oh god, this is terrible." Yeah. Sorry, you finish your thought, but I've been there.
No, I mean, I can think of one job in particular, right? I was absolutely needed the paycheck. It was not the right environment for me. I was noticing the misalignments and how I want to lead and how I want to be a leader. And so at that point, I took the action every single week to look for an organization that was more aligned to my non negotiables.
Yeah.
And again, I've always worked in tech. So I think this notion of every tech company is the grind and the hustle,
Yeah.
there
Dangerous.
may be an element to that because we're in a space where we're constantly disrupting and
Yeah.
changing. So I don't want to take that away from tech, but I strongly believe you can find organizations that are going to lead with calm and precision and understand that decoding the chaos is the first step to a constructive organization and team that won't require burnout or won't require you to be working until 9, 10 p.m. with no thanks. And, I think there's one other thing I want to say, which is there may be times when you do have to push forward in an organization. And I'm not saying every organization all the time is going to be not chaotic, right? I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. There's always going to be chaos. There's always going to
Yeah.
be an element. It's how you manage yourself through it and check in with yourself on your non negotiables.
Yeah. I think it's important. It's funny. It's part of what my company does is called Memento, where we help facilitate C-suite conversations, difficult conversations, just because I experienced similar type of world. It was a startup. We grew really fast. And where things, I believe, this is just like my perception of it, my take on it, where I think things went sideways was that fear of termination from the C suite. So
Hmm.
what happened was over time, intrinsically, none of those C suite members were people pleasers, backslappers. Everybody was an individual high performer, deserved that role. However, when around your peers and that overlap that you spoke of earlier, I think is really important when you said certain people start doing other jobs, that when that started to happen and you had one team member helping out another team, and people were just falling apart because the day's work was just not getting done, that nobody in the C suite wanted to have a critical conversation about that for fear of making the other person look bad. So because the C suite was kind of sticking together and concerned about the CEO and their reaction to that, it just kind of drifted and
Yeah.
ended up smashing. And it's a difficult thing, not just, it's difficult bottom up to talk to your boss. My goodness, terrifying, right? Top down can be difficult as well, but you can coach and lead and be supportive and not be a jerk. But I think in those chaotic environments, what sometimes is overlooked is that inter C-suite, not wanting to rock the boat thing.
Yeah. I mean, I completely see what you mean. And I think at that point, you need to align on what it is the goals are for the company,
Yes.
right? Some companies are fine working in a chaotic environment. Some people may find it to be exhilarating, right? But again, I have yet to find a chaotic environment that is running on urgency to scale effectively. I mean, they may get lucky, but for the long term, I think it's pretty difficult. And so, in your example, it's about really looking inward, right? Like, what kind of environment do you want to be a part of? How do you want to show up as a leader? If you know the chaos is around you, but you're overlooking it, that's a part of decoding the chaos. Why is that? Why is that overlook happening to begin with? Is it because you don't feel psychologically safe in the environment? to say what you wanna say. And I say this because I go back to the example that I used earlier in this conversation of me being in that meeting and me softening my stance just to keep the calm in the room, you know?
Yeah. No bueno. No bueno.
Yeah, no bueno for me because that's not how I wanna be, and that's certainly not in a leadership discussion. I wanna feel psychologically safe in that environment to say my point of view and not fear I'm gonna get some meeting from HR on the calendar later on that week, Like, that's not working. That's not
The
working for me.
worst. So how do you overcome? It's funny because now I'm really like replaying all these conversations in my head from my career, and I'm like, oh boy, and I'm thinking of the personalities in the room, and I'm like, how do you overcome? Like, I think I'm very receptive to different opinions and perspectives, and but I do know that there were executives who I really like loved, admired, and respected. That I know if I went to them and said, "Hey, Colleen is going to work with the team. She's going to come in. We're going to define some clarity so that people understand the rails to run on, so that we can all be, reduce the anxiety around here." And their interpretation of calm leadership looks like passivity, like just
Yeah.
being like not doing their job. How do you overcome that one?
I think you need to define what calm leadership is, because I certainly don't think that means slow or being just so calm you're overlooking. It's about identifying what's working and having that alignment and being very precise with how to move forward. It's being very clear. That's how I define calm leadership. It's having the clarity to see what's going on and making the decision to move forward. When do you ever make a good decision out of chaos? I
Yeah,
know I haven't. Like, in a
never.
chaotic environment, you are just running so fast, right?
Fight or flight. Yeah, your
Fight or
body full of
flight.
cortisol. You don't realize the cortisol's been in your system all day until you get home, and you're like,
Exactly.
"Why do I have a pounding headache? What's happening right now?" Yeah,
So I just don't think good decisions come from chaotic leadership. I think that they come from calm leadership, and that does not mean, in my opinion, slow. I think it's precision.
how do leaders that are, if somebody's listening to this and they have a 5-person team and they've just launched, like, how does a leader at that point use your framework when, literally everything that they're doing probably feels chaotic? Like, it might not
Yeah.
necessarily be, but it might, it's because it's new, and maybe you're a young founder and you're like, oh gosh, like, how do they implement your framework by like, what does it look like if hey, I'm going to hire Colleen to come in and help this 5-person team?
Yeah. I mean, first, you don't have to boil the ocean,
Yeah.
right? I think that's intimidating for a lot of leaders. Is, oh my gosh, there's so many problems here. Where do I even start? I think you've got to dig at your feet. So you've got to understand what is the current problem that you're trying to solve. Being a go-to-market leader, it's always pipeline and revenue for me, right? What's blocking revenue? What's blocking the sales team to close deals? And once you can start aligning on what's important for your team, then you can dig at your feet and understand what's blocking that. So
More.
just be prioritize
Yeah.
what chaotic issue do you want to solve first, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Right. Right. So I guess if somebody's listening to this right now, it's kind of like, how do they build without chaos? It's like, well, get clarity, like figure out what the goals are, and then you align from there. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. Well, I think the first is decoding the chaos. So it's understanding what is causing the chaos on your team. What is everyone coming to you and complaining about?
Mm.
What are you constantly hearing? What's the noise? Right?
Like, I'm like laughing to myself. So I'm like, you also have to be careful about that, because I did have one job where we were intaking too much feedback with anonymous. We had a system that you could
Yeah.
anonymously give feedback and complaints. And one of the complaints was, and it's like a legendary comment, was, "What's the deal with the coffee?" And that was it. And that was it. The CEO of that was like hysterical laughing, like, company all hands. He's like, "Guys, come on. Like, what are we doing here? Like, that's just ridiculous."
If
So
that's your biggest problem at a
yeah,
company,
yeah,
you're doing all right, like, that's pretty
yeah.
okay.
Like, you don't realize how good you got it, kid. That's yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there'll be a commonality amongst everybody, right?
Yeah,
I go
definitely
back to my
patterns.
example with tension between the marketing and sales team, the finger pointing. That's
Yeah.
causing the chaos, right? but then understanding that it's role definition, I'm sorry, not role definition, but lead definition down the buying funnel that's
Mm,
causing that chaos. So then it's really taking accountability to design what that looks like and having those tough conversations as a leader and understanding where both sides are coming from. And that's honestly, Chris, where a lot of the breakdown happens.
yeah.
People don't really want to get in that level of uncomfortability and have those tough conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a landmine. There are executives in my generation, I think, that just don't really know how to have those types of conversations because they never had it when they were younger employees because it was just kind of, hey, you don't like it, get out of here.
Yeah.
You're done. And I think even the fact that you and I are talking about this, I think is like a beautiful thing. The fact
Yeah.
that you have a business that's doing this for companies is a beautiful thing. I think when people I think like intrinsically people know that chaos can't be good for growth within an organization, but sometimes you just got to take it on the chin because you're like you said, you just need the paycheck sometimes. And it's kind of like, doesn't always have to be like that. So you do in a way you're doing God's work. I do believe that
Thank you.
from where I sit because I've been through too many terrible companies with terrible bosses. So
Well, I think in that environment, right? Let's unpack that because if you're
yeah,
having a tough conversation with sales and marketing, you got to align on what the outcome is because everyone wants the same outcome and continually bring that up in the discussion. And the outcome is really simple with sales and marketing: more pipeline, more bookings, right? It's
mhm,
really that simple. So,
mhm,
how are we going to get to that? And
mm,
what does that look like? What I find in these conversations, everyone's showing up with their own agenda, right?
yeah,
And they're showing up because marketing needs to prove MQLs to the CMO and sales needs to prove revenue to the CRO. So everyone's having their own agenda, but no one's looking at the shared interest or the shared goal and
yeah.
working together. And that's also another common thing I see is teams work in silos.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah. Do you have the hack that I would use to solve that is I would create sales comp infrastructure where the marketing team would get a smaller comp, but a smaller comp for a successful converted lead.
Oh,
So
I like
that would give a gentle onus on them. It's like, hey, you saying your lead is so great, better make sure it's great.
that.
Because when it gets over here and we convert it, you're going to get some money. So let's make
Yeah.
sure it's exceptional. Let's make sure that we're using analytics and really going deep dive on defining who that marketing avatar is. Who is that customer? How are we getting in front of them? What are their pain points? And then allowing for that to be part of the discussion always made the marketing team perk up and not point fingers at the BDR.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's having the pipeline, but making sure the pipeline is the appropriate pipeline. You mentioned earlier, which I think is so important, is like, you're looking at the tech stack. Like, what's the CRM? What are we using? Does everybody understand how to use the CRM? My last gig, I did an analysis of the tech stack, and all the salespeople were saying, that the CRM is awful. And once I really dug into it, I'm like, no, it's user error. You guys just
Yeah.
don't know how to use it properly. Like, and let's figure that out, and define, what a lead is, what a contact is, what an account is, what the opportunity is. We only put dollars in the opportunity for the conversion so that the dashboard is clean and you can look at the, clean in, clean out instead of junk in, junk out. It's kind of a fun thing though. I think what you're doing must be really joyful because when you're able to add perspective to companies and give them clarity, they're going to overperform. And when
Yeah.
that happens, it's like, "Oh, yeah, I helped them do that. That's cool."
Yeah.
Are there any specific case studies that you wanna brag about, or you still, like, you're in the weeds right now working with your own client base and trying to, get to that silver chalice case study?
I think the best case studies are when people just come to me and they're thinking, they're just at a loss, like everyone's working in a silo, the systems aren't talking to each other, the role clarity isn't there, but they really wanna do better.
Yeah,
That's what I love, like, that moment, the egos aside,
yeah,
it's like, "Wait, we want our company to do well." And that's when I'm like, let's do this together then. We can do this. And really what it is, I just said it, but I'll say it again, is everyone leaving checking their egos at the door. And I love the example that you just brought up when you dove into a CRM solution and you realized it was user error. Like, that's decoding the chaos right there. People will oftentimes say they know how to use something when they don't, and that's checking your ego at the door. It's really saying, we need structure.
Mm,
And you mentioned it, I'll say it again, but everyone loves structure, even CEOs, and sometimes you're so close in it in a business, you need someone like me to come in and say, "Okay, this is what I'm seeing. Here's how we decode the chaos here. Here's
mm,
how we put together a framework where we identify structures and design the calm
mm.
so we can start leading in a rhythm that's based off transparency and people are trusting each other." That's the good stuff. And then from there, you build without chaos. And you create systems that scale calmly, but provide results.
I
That's
dig
really
it.
what everyone wants?
Picking up what you're putting down. So for anybody that's listening that has their head on their desk because they're so exhausted,
Uh,
that might be on a treadmill listening to this and dreading going to work tomorrow morning, or maybe they're working out in the morning and they're dreading to go to work today. How can they get in touch with you and say to their boss, hey, hey, boss,
yeah,
please bring Colleen in to make order out of this chaos? And
I love that.
what's the
Yeah.
best way to work with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Colleen Gepfert. Also, buildwithoutchaos.com. I have my contact information there. I also, for someone who is really has, like you said, their head on the desk and is miserable, I think that also listening to the Build Without Chaos podcast is a great start
There
because
you
I
go.
really talk with different C-level executives there from global companies, small companies that have seen chaos and have had the self-awareness to pivot and move in a different direction. And I find that so encouraging because I get to explore that idea with them and they've done it on scales that some people haven't.
Love it. The courage to pivot. That's a good one. I dig it. Well, thank you so much, Colleen, for joining us on the Quantum Shift podcast. I think your message is important. I think like I said, you're doing God's work because I've been there. Man, is it awful when you're in a chaotic organization? Tough to get out of bed, that's for sure. So I
Absolutely.
thank you for it. I thank you for being good at your job. That's always cool. And I will make sure that everybody that's listening to this has all of your contact information so they can get in touch with you and hire you to solve their chaotic environments. But thanks so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.
See ya. Thanks so much for watching the Quantum Shift podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, comment, and share.